Have we learned anything new about the San Francisco 49ers players on the hit show on Netflix? Receivers, we're going to talk about Debo. We're going to talk about Aiyuk. A certain Brock Purdy graphic that was kind of interesting. All right, we're going to talk about that. And is Brandon Aiyuk Elite? Matt Harmon's reception perception definitely says so. We're talking about all that and more right here on Locked On 49ers. Let's go.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another live episode of Locked On 49ers. I'm your host, former NFL and AFL defensive back, Eric Crocker. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see we don't have Brian Peacock today. He's handling business in Central Valley, but we got my guy, Jason Aponte. You guys can follow us on Twitter at Crocky209, at Jason Aponte 2103. I'm still trying to get him to change all those damn numbers. He has not yet, but I'm working on it. Just like I'm not going to spoil the surprise. He got something coming up, but I've been working on something else behind the scenes with Mr. Jason Aponte. We're going to talk about all things San Francisco 49ers here. But first, I want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Day. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. That is Game Time. Let's go. And it's Game Time, not San Francisco 49ers game time, but it's game time to talk about the San Francisco 49ers and the hit show on Netflix, Receivers. I've been dialed in. Aponte's been dialed in. Aponte, first, I want to ask you, man, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Filling in for Brian Peacock feels a lot like Brandon Allen filling in for Brock Purdy, but we're going to make it work. We're going to make it work, right?
Did you skip Sam Darnold and went straight to Brandon Allen?
I mean, Sam Darnold, the starter for the Minnesota Vikings. Yeah, I went right to Brad. I probably skipped Josh Dobbs, but I'm trying to make it seem like I'm not even the backup. I'm the backup's backup, right? I'm the guy that everybody wants around because he just throws good practice balls. But yeah, it's me trying to fill in just for one episode and try to get a W. That's what a backup quarterback would do in the same situation.
Hey, listen, that's big shoes to fill, and there's even more pressure on me to get these ad reads right. I already kind of butchered it in the intro a little bit, but hey, man, we're going to continue to just kind of go with the flow of everything on this show. Shout out to all the live audience on YouTube right now. If you're not on YouTube because you listen to the audio version, head over to YouTube, give us a like and subscribe, all right? And join in on this conversation because I think this is going to be more than just Aponte and I discussing 49ers. We're going to get a lot of questions, thoughts, and everything from everyone in the chat, but we're going to dive straight into it. Watching Receivers, I'd say this is highly anticipated. Watching this show, I've been ready for it. I watched Quarterbacks last offseason, and I thought Quarterbacks was one of the best shows I've seen on Netflix. A lot of great shows on Netflix, but if you are a sports fan, Netflix doing a lot of good things. They had the Sprint show. I thought that was very intriguing for a novice sprinter fan. Quarterbacks last year was great. A little bit different of a dynamic, and I have a kind of take on how they're doing it with the receivers, but seeing two 49er players on here, a lot of people upset by that. George Kittle, Debo Samuel. You kind of get to see a little behind the scene. And I'd say one of my probably favorite moments from the 49ers perspective was how excited or surprised George Kittle was to see Nick Bosa at his birthday party after the game. He was like, Bosa's here? But what are some takeaways that you've seen so far from this show?
It was really funny because he actually said, you know how hard it is to get Nick Bosa out of the house. And I think there's a little bit of a reputation, I think, that's out there, or a narrative about Nick Bosa's maybe a party guy, a frat guy. Doesn't seem like that. George Kittle was super, super surprised to see him there. But I think one of the biggest takeaways was the Debo Samuel injury in that 3-game streak, because a lot of people, the discussion has grown a lot more about, well, what happens when Debo Samuel's not in the lineup and how does this offense look? And I think that Cleveland game was a game that you could point to and say, well, Kyle Shanahan doesn't adjust well. But I think what a lot of people forget is if the game plan is installed and it's installed for someone to have a big game and then they leave that game, it's not as easy to just say, well, we're just going to throw out everything that we worked on all week and just go with this, or just have someone step in and run those same routes as Debo because we know that nobody is like him. I think that 3-game streak, there's a way to contextualize each loss without it just being Kyle doesn't know how to run this offense without Debo. I think there's a few other things that we can point to in that same streak of the losses to Cleveland, Minnesota, and Cincinnati back to back, that 3-game streak. I don't think it's all that, but there was a little interesting graphic that came out about that in terms of what the offense looks like and what it looks like without Deebo Samuel.
All right, so here's the graphic that Aponte is alluding to. All right, here we go. We got Brock Purdy this season, and we're talking about the 2023 season. It says with Deebo Samuel on the field. Now, if you watch the show Receiver, this is a graphic that popped up on the show, and it's very clear here. Samuel on the field, Brock Purdy, pretty much elite. 71 completion, or excuse me, 71% on his completion percentage, 8 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, and only 12 off-target percentage throws. Now, you look at Samuel off the field, all right, completes 61% of his passes, 3 TDs to INT, so 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and 21 off-target percentage. So you see a drastic drop-off in the efficiency and the numbers of Brock Purdy, at least what we're used to seeing. And I think part of it could be, what you said, you're building this game plan. You have, Deebo out there, you got CMC, you have Brandon Aiyuk, you have George Kittle. As you're going through the week, you prepare for all those guys to be out there, and then you remove one of those guys, and clearly it's showing that Deebo is a pivotal aspect of that. And you kind of see a drop off with Brock Purdy as far as his efficiency goes. Is this something that should be alarming moving forward if Deebo either gets hurt or maybe the 49ers eventually move off of Deebo? Or is it just, they weren't able to adjust on the fly in game or in season to the absence of Deebo? But moving forward, that isn't something that you should be, really worried about at all between Brock Purdy and running this offense.
The 49ers are just not going to be better when Deebo Samuel's not in there. I think that's something that has been said. It's just like, oh, well, everything will be fine if Deebo's not there. That's diminishing what he does. If Deebo Samuel was just somebody that you could replace, then other teams wouldn't be looking to find their version of Deebo Samuel. I think that's one of the most tired comps in the NFL draft right now at this point is, oh, they found their Deebo. Well, if everybody found their Deebo, then why is there only one Deebo? But I do think that these 3 games, I can contextualize each game and show you a different reason aside from Deebo Samuel not being there, right? I think what a lot of people forget is Trent Williams didn't play in these 3 games as well too. That's no small feat, right? To get across the Cleveland game. If Jake Moody makes a kick, we're talking about a Niners comeback win, right, in that game because Brock took him right down. The second game in Minnesota, Christian McCaffrey fumbles in the red zone early on. The 49ers defense gives up a touchdown at the end of the half. Wasn't looking like themselves in terms of getting after the passer. That's a game that I probably put a little bit more of the onus on the defense in that game because without Justin Jefferson, and you saw it in receiver, Justin Jefferson's not in this game. You think the 49ers defense has to be able to find a way to get it done with just Jordan Addison there, and he's no slouch. I'm just saying the defense is a little bit more my issue in that game. And then the Cincinnati game, I'm just going to say it. I think Brock Purdy had his worst game of the season at the end where he just made some critical turnovers. I think back to the handoff that was supposed to be a handoff to Elijah Mitchell that he turns around and he throws right to a defensive tackle. All of these things are the reasons why they lost this game. Now, would it have helped if Deebo Samuel was there? For sure. But these 3 games, obviously, if your takeaway is going to be Deebo's not there, they can't win. That's kind of fair, but I would say that there are more factors to the reasons that the 49ers lost this game. And a lot of it was they just weren't playing their best ball in those 3 games altogether.
Yeah, and statistically, you talked about the Cincinnati Bengals game. You look at some of the numbers, and Brock Purdy, he ran the ball very well. Maybe his highest yards on the ground output of the season. I'd have to fact check that, but I know he ran for a decent amount of yards. He threw for a lot of yards. If you told me that's the game he threw for the most yards as well, I would be like, yeah, I could see that being the case. But also, again, what we're pointing to right here is more of turnovers and efficiency that dropped off. And I'd say even in the Cincinnati game where, turned the ball over multiple times, fumbled the ball away, you had some opportunities where the defense didn't quite help. I mean, that was probably Joe Burrow's best game, but still going back to the drop off with Brock Purdy. But, I think with Deebo Samuel, a lot of the conversation, around him, it starts to get cloudy because some of the things that he doesn't quite do well, right? He's not this tremendous route runner. And if you're watching receivers, I have a whole another takeaway with Devontae Adams and kind of what he's going through on that show, which I think actually is if I had a chance to talk to the Netflix producers, I would say scrap everybody and just follow Devontae Adams for this entire season, because to me that is the best part of this show. Not wanting to see him like frustrated, but just what he was going through, how transparent he was throughout that process. Jimmy Garoppolo, and I'm like, this guy hates Jimmy Garoppolo on the field, not off the field, but on the field. I'm like, gosh, he hates this guy. All right, but very transparent. Were there any takeaways from, like, just kind of what you've seen so far from George Kittle? I haven't finished the season yet. I'm about four episodes in, but you got George Kittle on there. I'd say my biggest takeaway is just the dynamic between with his marriage, between him, his wife, their relationship. How she is able to kind of be that person of assistance, through everything. And I'm like, man, that's a pretty cool dynamic, but not a whole lot of, so far from what I've seen, intriguing aspects of the 49ers through 3.5 episodes.
Well, I would say that I think if you didn't know that George Kittle was a fun guy, this is going to be the show for you to learn that, right? And I think everybody knows that. There wasn't really any overarching takeaways. I think the family dynamic, I think the one thing that I noticed, and I've seen every episode, is the way he prepares on the field with speaking things into existence and talking to himself. And everybody prepares in different ways, right? And everybody has different ways to psych themselves up. But the way that he kind of talks to himself and says, "Stay sharp, George," unleash the beast, all like talking to himself, all these positive words. And then obviously the part that a lot of people knew, but seeing it play out, was his father writing him before every single game, a letter, right? And showing him all the pictures of like the things that he's trying to talk to. Got me a little choked up, because it makes me think about my dad, right? Like and how like my dad would hype me up like at times when I used to play sports when I was younger. So that's really cool. I think the family dynamic about George Kittle is something that we kind of knew, but the inside in, like the inside part of this now is like, man, it's really important to him, having his grandmother of 100 years be there at the Arizona game. She's talking about ball. She's not just sitting there just to be there. Like, his family is a big part of it. So I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. But I think also the way he prepares is something that I didn't really know.
Did you know about the party bus that they take to and from games?
No, I first of all, that's very responsible. Second of all, I know that it gets crazy in there. So I don't know if you got up to the part with the Dallas game, right? That's right after his birthday, right?
I have seen that.
Okay. So, I mean, they get on there and George is just shotgunning beers and everything. Obviously, he turned 30 years old. That's a milestone birthday. But yeah, that party bus must get a little wild, especially after victories and everything, let alone his birthday, and then they put all his shoes up and everything. So that's really cool. He just, for a lot of people to think that maybe George Kittle is putting on some sort of act, all that stuff is genuine. That's just who he is. And I think that's really cool that his whole family is involved with his life that way.
I saw someone in like the chat on here, Locked On 49ers, and they called him like corny. And I'm like, nah, I don't get that vibe, right? I don't get that vibe from him. It just comes off as a very genuine, good dude that's having a great time. He likes to have fun with it. And you see that through a lot of what he's doing on the field. All right, we're going to continue to talk some receivers, 49ers, and definitely get into the chat as well. But up next, we're going to make sure that we talk more about Deebo Samuel, and we got some Brandon Aiyuk stuff coming up as well. Is he elite? Mount Harmon definitely thinks so. Here we go. Coming up next. All right, this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. All right, passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. All right, eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, our exhaust kits, LED headlights, and much more. Whether you're into speed, you're into power, you're into style, eBay Motors has everything that you need, and they definitely have you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusives apply. eBay's guaranteed fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, Aponte, we have another graphic that we're going to throw up here. And this one is Brandon Aiyuk. All right. First, I kind of want to get your thoughts on where you things are with Brandon Aiyuk. Our chat has heard between myself, Brian Peacock, really kind of talk about this ad nauseum, and just with this scenario and how it's kind of dragged out right now, what it's looking like. I've been saying all along, and I get asked this in public. People are like, hey, Croc, what do you think about Brandon Aiyuk? You think they're going to sign him? And I'm like, yeah, they've offered him a certain amount that they feel comfortable with. I just don't believe the 49ers want to pay him more than that. Like, why would I pay a receiver $30 million, right? Like, because that's what some of the other guys are getting, right? 30 plus $1 million. And he has that type of ability. Clearly, as we put up this graphic, you'll see that. But the 49ers don't utilize him that way. They don't feature him in the offense. I know that over the last 2-3 years, he's been the most targeted player, but the 49ers don't target receivers a whole lot. So you have 105 targets, and that leads the team. But when you look at the guys that are getting paid 28, 29, $30 million, they're getting 150 plus targets. So he's not getting the same opportunities. He's not getting featured. If we're not planning on utilizing you the way that those guys are used, why would we pay you that amount? I feel like that's the holdup. What are your thoughts on that so far?
Couldn't have said it any better. So imagine you're Brandon Aiyuk, right? And you're looking around at all these guys who are making $30 million, and you look at their numbers and you're finding that yours are strikingly similar. And you say, well, if he's making that, I think that I deserve to make that, right? And he spoke at length on the Pivot podcast about, yeah, we had a number, and then all these other numbers started coming out. And I know there's a lot of frustration about how long it takes the 49ers to get this done, but I want to remind people that when Nick Bosa was going for a deal, there was nobody else that was going to help reset his market. He was already going to be the highest paid defensive end, right? There wasn't another defensive end in there. Same thing with Warner, same thing with Kittle. But the crux of this is exactly what you said. It's, why would we pay you wide receiver 1 money when you're a wide receiver 2 in our eyes? And Brandon Aiyuk is incredibly frustrated by that because he says, well, whose fault is that?
Well, I don't even think it's that they think he's a wide receiver 2. I think it's just more so we are not going to feature you. Like, we just,
right.
One, we don't have to. Or you got Christian McCaffrey, the offense runs through him. We're going to hand him the ball. We're going to throw him the ball. Then we just talked about Deebo Samuel. We saw his impact when he's on the field and when he's off the field with some of the drop-off with efficiency ratings for Brock Purdy. Then you have George Kittle. We've seen how important he is in this offense. And if you haven't watched receivers yet, you see him blocking. You see him catching the ball. He was the only tight end in the NFL last year to go for over 1,000 yards. Then you have Aiyuk, who, of course, like, 1,350 yards. That's awesome. That's great. But he actually had more targets the year before and only had barely squeaked by over 1,000 yards. So we could see a drop off. And I don't think Kyle Shanahan cares if he throws him the ball 8 times in the game or if he throws him the ball 3 times. Like, as long as we win, offense is fluid, we are fine. So I don't even think it's so much that they don't view him as a guy who could potentially be the wide receiver 1, but as we've seen so far, which was weird when you see reports about 49ers reaching out or looking into potentially trading for Justin Jefferson. It's like, you don't want to use a guy like that. So that was always kind of odd or intriguing to me. And that's a conversation for a whole nother day. But when you look at, I don't even think they just, it's like, hey, no, he's a wide receiver too. I think it's just, we just don't want to target you 170 times. We don't have to.
Right. I don't think they think his ability is a wide receiver too. I just think that in this offense, they're like, we view you as a guy that is going to put a wide receiver 2 like numbers because we have all these other mouths to feed. Like, it's not them diminishing who he is. Remember, the hardest thing about this is Brandon Aiyuk was someone that they identified, developed, and he became the guy exactly who they wanted him to be, right? Now, the whole idea of trading somebody is for draft picks, but draft picks they're only as good as the person that you draft. You can have 1 million draft picks and whiff on all of them. You can draft all the wide receivers you want, right? For every time that, the Bills traded Stephon Diggs, and then that turns into Justin Jefferson. Well, sometimes you trade A.J. Brown and it turns into Traylon Burks. Or sometimes in the first round, sometimes you draft Jalen Reagor right in front of Justin Jefferson. Those are the types of things that happen. And the bust rate for wide receivers is by far the highest of any position. So it's hard because I understand where Aiyuk is coming from. He understands that he knows he's on par with all these guys. I think there's plenty of data points that we could point to that will put him in that same level, even higher than some guys, if you want to view it that way. But in this offense, it's hard for the 49ers to look at you and say, we're going to give you the same amount of money as someone who's getting the ball all the time or is like featured that way when we're not going to feature you that way. And I think Aiyuk is frustrated with that part because he's done everything the right way. He's done everything they wanted him to do. And now it's getting down time to pay. And they're just like, well, I don't know if we see you like that. And that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing to hear.
I was in it was like this, it was a spaces on Twitter. I know I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys have been on those. And it was actually a spaces held by Washington Commanders people. And obviously we've seen a lot of the antics and everything that Brandon Aiyuk is doing. And people are like, oh, like, do you want this guy like this? Like, he's a diva. Look at some of the antics. And I'm like, listen, y'all, this is all new to everybody. Like, Brandon Aiyuk barely even talks. You don't hear anything about him, or at least bad from like a character standpoint. This is a guy who goes out there, does his job, super efficient at it. What do you need me to do? You need me to, run routes, catch balls. You need me to block. You need me to block 30 yards down the field. He is a team player first, and then he handles his. I think the biggest issue with this entire BA thing is now they're using that against him. His selflessness, right? A guy who's not demanding 10 targets a game, and now he's not having the same numbers as other guys, even though his efficiency through the roof. I've been saying this whole time that he led the NFL in yards per reception, but I think George Pickens actually edged him out after that explosive game he had late in the year. But second in the league in yards per reception, and I'm doing everything you guys are asking me to do. And you guys use those against me in these contract negotiations. I think that's a big reason as to why he's as hurt as he is. And he's like, well, they don't want me. And it's like, no, we do want you. We just don't quite want you at the number you want. We're going to get into more Brandon Aiyuk, reception perception, Matt Harmon, basically alluding to the fact that this guy is elite. All right, we're going to talk about all that coming up next. All right, let's get into Brandon Aiyuk, the numbers, Matt Harmon's reception perception. All right, here we go. Now, as you guys can see here, and if you read the fine print there, all right, he says here, new Brandon Aiyuk's 2023 reception perception profile has been added to the site ahead of schedule. He must have been really excited to see this because he's like, nah, I got to get this out to the people.
He's a big Brandon Aiyuk fan, and he always has been. So this was something he's been working on and cooking. So he couldn't wait to drop this.
Now there's two graphics here. You have that one, and then you have this one here. Mm-hmm. More times than not, you see things. You see a little bit of red here, a little bit of red. So to see this graphic right here, success by route in 2023, basically talking about the success he's had when running certain routes. If you're watching right now on YouTube, this thing is lit up green like a Christmas tree, where there's a 9 route, which is a go route. All right, you got your corners, you got your posts, you got your out, digs, curls, comebacks, slants, flats, screens, other. He is green in every single aspect. So let's read some of the numbers here that Matt Harmon has. 78.7 success rate versus man. All right, that's 96 percentile. All right, obviously, that is great. 85.4% success rate versus zone. 91st percentile. 83.6% success rate versus press. That's 97 percentile. He said Aiyuk accomplished things last season on film that only the truly special wide receivers have done in the RP reception perception era. And he has the link for the full article. You guys can find him on Twitter at MattHarmon_BYB. All right, so we're seeing this. And when you see these things here, all right, again, we got success by route, and then we also have route percentage in 2023, like routes that he's running more of or less than. Obviously, you see the 9 route doesn't run out a whole lot, curls, not a whole lot, flats, not a whole lot. But a lot of the other routes, this dude has a complete route tree. When you see something like this and you're Brandon Aiyuk's agent, what are you thinking?
You take a printout and you slide it across the table. And part of the article too, and this is the stuff that we're talking about when we say elite. And I want to read off some of the names because Aiyuk cleared the 90th percentile in success rate versus man, zone, and press coverage. Right, 90th percentile. You always want to be higher and higher in the percentile if you're not aware of how that works. It's only happened 9 times since 2014, since reception perception came around. This is about 10 years. These are the names of the players that have done it. Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson twice, Antonio Brown twice, Stephon Diggs twice, Michael Thomas, and Brandon Aiyuk. Now, obviously, Michael Thomas had, kind of started out really hot, whatever. Devontae Adams,
Had a
Justin
spark
Jefferson.
when you started, but now you're just garbage. But
Don't do that.
Fell from top 10 and not mentioned at all.
Right. But Devontae Adams, Justin Jefferson, despite his antics now, Antonio Brown, Stephon Diggs, and Brandon Aiyuk. Not Tyreek Hill, not CeeDee Lamb, not any other receiver right now that aside from Devontae Adams and Justin Jefferson. Brandon Aiyuk. And one other thing this is the biggest takeaway, Crock, and this is going to start the conversation right here. Matt Harmon, while he was charting, says 78.7 success versus man coverage, given he sees it more often than the receivers as the X in this system, is outrageously impressive. You may find it interesting that two of Aiyuk's best games in terms of getting open against man were the Ravens Christmas game and the Super Bowl against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I think there's a large narrative that Brandon Aiyuk wasn't getting open in the Super Bowl. Brandon Aiyuk's not doing anything in this Super Bowl. That's interesting. That's really interesting because the way it kind of looks, and I had to cross-reference this with watching the All-22, is either he wasn't the look or the Chiefs had done something to disrupt the timing. But Brandon Aiyuk was open. So I think we need to close the book on the Brandon Aiyuk didn't get himself open in the Super Bowl narrative. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I'm taking away from all this.
Watching receivers on Netflix and watching Devontae Adams and how he's working to get open and the ball is thrown somewhere else, it's just very clear that in some of these offenses, they're just not prioritizing the receiver. And I think for Kyle Shanahan, we don't have to prioritize Brandon Aiyuk. Let's just run my scheme. We're going to get the ball out in timing and rhythm. We're going to have one of the most efficient offenses doing that until you don't. And obviously we saw in the Super Bowl or even in the Baltimore Ravens game, you don't. So what do you do in that instance, right? What is your change up? And I think from there, that is when you would like to see a 49ers team. Again, one of the most efficient offenses, if not the most efficient offense in the NFL. So clearly they don't have issues moving the rock. But if there's a team that challenges you in a different way, they match up differently, they're willing to do certain things, what is your change up to that? And if it's not prioritizing a guy like Brandon Aiyuk to where now, all right, look, we're struggling this to run man. Debo is struggling to get open. George Kittle, they're putting hands on him. They're loading the box first to run. What else can we do here? I don't know. Maybe figure out different ways to get the ball into Brandon Aiyuk's hands. And that's when I would like to see them say, you know what? Yes, we would like to just do play action here, hit a deep crosser and all that. But when they're playing man, those windows really shrink. How do we help these guys? And how do we get the ball in our best route runner's hands, the guy that gets the most separation? Well, let's motion them across the formation. Motion them to tight splits. Let's motion them to bunches. Let's do clear out. Let's do things to where we now prioritize getting the guy the ball that's beating man coverage. Some of the things you see, and again, I don't know Brock Purdy's progressions. All right. But I can just assume that he's throwing the ball to a place based on what the defense is giving him. Pre-snap, post-snap, what is it looking like? Okay, if they do this, I should go here. And I think he has a great read and understanding of what that should look like. But at certain times where it's just like, you know what? Jimmy probably should have did this with Devontae Adams. Forget this offense. Forget this, whatever. I have to figure out a way to win this game. And if I'm going to do that, this guy, Brandon Aiyuk, is the guy that's going to really help me. And at that point, I don't care about anybody else. I'm going to Aiyuk. So when you see a blitz coming and, or you see a free runner, everybody the name of Chris Jones, forget throwing the ball to Jennings. All right. Where is Brandon Aiyuk? Oh, the DB fell on the ground. He's wide open in the back of the end zone. Pitch and catch, touchdown. Let's go, right? Oh, no. I'm going to throw it to Juwan Jennings, who is not BA. I'm going to overshoot him, and now we're punting the ball. Kicking the field goal instead of going in for 6 or potentially 8 points. So when people think about featuring the receiver, I think they assume that everything about your game plan has to be about that receiver. And a lot of guys in the NFL, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, should be Devontae Adams. Some of those guys, it is about them, right? Tyreek Hill. A lot of that offense is structured around him.
Mhm.
49ers don't have to do that until you need to do it. And I think that's where you would see the biggest value in Brandon Aiyuk, but that's just not what they do. And I don't know about you, but I would actually like to see that aspect of their game improve more. And when you think about this team winning that Super Bowl, getting over that kind of Super Bowl hump, I think it is going to be predicated on really having that curveball that the 49ers currently just don't have or haven't
Mhm.
shown to have it.
Yeah, and there was an article that was written by a guy named Gennaro Felice, I think, on NFL.com, and he talked about why the 49ers are going to repeat as the top offense and what's the strength and weakness of their offense. Funny enough, Croc, the strength is Kyle Shanahan's scheme. The weakness is Kyle Shanahan's scheme. And what he meant by that was when everything's going right and everything's clicking, you can't stop it. You get rolled, right? But when you get behind or things don't go according to plan, where are the adjustments? Where are the ways for you? And that's kind of what you're saying right here in this. And it's when the 49ers are rolling, right? And they're putting up 35, 40, it looks easy. But when things start to get a little tough, or a defensive coordinator like Jim Schwartz or Steve Spagnuolo is finding ways to disrupt timing and disrupt the things that you want to do, where is that little bit of a change? And I think that's kind of what he was talking about and what you're saying as well too. Another thing that kind of, we're talking about Brandon Aiyuk and we're talking about this offense. So many of these things that are reads, right? Like everyone just looks at, oh, there's a guy running wide open. He might not even be a read on the play because there's so many times where they have an option to just split the field down the middle, right? Like Brock Purdy looks at what the defense is giving him. If he sees that there's a safety and he's cheating down and you've got one-on-one with Brandon Aiyuk, we're going right to him. I'm not looking at anybody else. We're cutting this down the middle, right? And different times it'll happen with different people. And there'll be times where Deebo Samuel just is literally running a clear out route just for the sake of clearing out and creating space. So when people like look at tape and they're looking at it and they're like, oh, he's wide open, it's tough to understand what this is supposed to be or what it's supposed to look like or how they're teaching it. Is that supposed to be a read? Is that going to be the second read? Is that going to be the third read? Do you even have time to get to the third read? All of that stuff is relative. So when you're watching receiver and you hear Randy Moss in the beginning say, all we can do is get open. We can't throw ourselves the ball. And I think that's a lot of the frustrating part at times, especially when you talk about Devontae Adams, who was like literally in that Detroit game running wide open and Jimmy just sailed that thing over his head. And right, like those are the types of things that oh man, he lost it on that one play. But like those are the types of things. It's like, yeah, a guy's wide open. Someone has to deliver him the ball. Is that the right look? And I think that's what makes the conversation so interesting when it comes to this. So in terms of what you're looking at right now in this reception perception data, it's literally Brandon Aiyuk can get himself open against anything. And I think that's what you're looking for. And there's one more thing that was actually really interesting too. Matt Harmon talks about the X receiver, and every time that the 49ers have had an X receiver who can beat man and press, they've been at their best. And some of the best seasons ever for an X receiver in terms of yards per route run, and I believe it's, if I'm not mistaken, it's pulling up right now. Actually, I've got it. It's yards per route run, and it's all in a Shanahan or Kubiak system. And that's very interesting. So it's yards per route run and 400 plus routes. The four receivers are Andre Johnson in 2012, which Kyle Shanahan was under. Julio Jones, 2015. Yep, 2015, 2016, 2017. 2023, Brandon Aiyuk. 2023, Nico Collins, which is Kubiak as well, too. So it's funny how we talk about, well, is this going to be something that the 49ers need to prioritize? But when the 49ers are at their best, they've got an X receiver that can do it all and beat any sort of coverage, right? And obviously we're not saying that.
Or when this scheme is at its best.
Right, 100%. Yeah, like it raises the level of the efficiency, right? When it comes to being able to beat these coverages. Brandon Aiyuk, Julio Jones, Andre Johnson, all under Kyle Shanahan. And those were some of the best offenses he's ever run.
That's good stuff there. That's good stuff. And it's just more stuff for the 49ers kind of build off of offensively. Because, again, you look at this team, they are terrific. These aren't, Peacock and Aponte and I, we're not complaining about the 49ers offense. It's just, hey, how the 49ers offense, like, how can they get a little bit better, or at least be a little bit better when they need to be better? And we don't expect this team to be perfect, but they did have a skid there, 3 straight games, did not score over 17 points, lost every one of those games. And then you look in the Super Bowl, a team that was really just firing on all cylinders, kind of heading into it. You saw kind of a little bit of lows, but things are going to get tighter come playoff time. They were able to figure it out at different times. I think a big part of it, especially in the Lions game, getting the ball to Brandon Aiyuk. Would like to see them prioritize that a little bit more, especially in the Super Bowl. We got a question here from Charlene Crosley. She said, did the Juwan Jennings signal the 49ers willingness to make Brandon Aiyuk play on his 5th-year option without a contract extension?
That's a good question. And there was a report from Dan Graziano that came out of ESPN about that he's coming around to sticking around on the 5th-year option. I wonder if this turns itself into a little bit more of a T. Higgins type thing, except T. Higgins wasn't drafted in the 1st round, so they had to franchise tag him. What does this look like next offseason, right? It's tough to say that there's a chance that Brandon Aiyuk could just play on his 5th-year option and somehow either walk away for nothing or they tag him and trade him. But it's not the worst thing for the 49ers to do, because it does a few things for you. One, you get to see Brandon Aiyuk one more time in this offense. You get to figure out what you're going to do with him or Deebo Samuel. You get data points on Ricky Pearsall and Jacob Cowing, who I think everybody's excited for, but there's no sure things in the NFL, right? Like you still would need a year to at least assess where they are and how they're going to fit. That gives them another data point to understand, hey, maybe we can't move away from these guys. Maybe these guys aren't the contributors we thought they were going to be right away, right? We all have high hopes, but things have happened. So it does kind of behoove the 49ers to sit here and kind of just play the leverage game and say, listen, play out your 5th year and we'll see what happens, because they get to collect data on every situation. Aiyuk, Deebo, where's Ricky Pearsall? Where's Jacob Cowing? What do we do with this offense? How does this offense look? How are we going to move forward? We have draft picks. It kicks the can down the road, but just gives them more information. So I don't know if Juwan Jennings, that deal signaled that. I just think they really like Juwan Jennings, and they just really want to have him around, and he just embodies exactly what the 49ers want in a wide receiver.
We talked about Brandon Aiyuk. We talked about, Juwan Jennings. These are guys that were drafted by the San Francisco 49ers. And Tony has a great question here. He says, which player are you most interested in seeing in the preseason? Oh, that's not the question I wanted to go to. Sorry about that. Here we go. Here's the question right here from Christian Nunez. Who on the roster today, also drafted by the Niners, is going to be the one that retires a Niner? I thought that was an interesting question there. So
yeah,
is there a guy that was drafted by them? Let's say Aaron Banks. Do you see Aaron Banks being a 49er throughout the entirety of his career? Are there any of those 49ers? I think the easy answer there is Nick Bosa, Brock Purdy. Like I just regardless of if they start to diminish their skills a little bit, especially Brock Purdy, you got a franchise quarterback. You typically don't see those guys hit the market, and you'd like to see him not switch teams. But, do you have a couple of names that come to mind for you?
Yeah, it would have been easy. Nick Bosa, that's easy. Fred Warner, absolutely. I don't think there's any way that Fred Warner ever leaves his team, just based on the way that the modern game is and how he is as a linebacker and what he can do. I think one that may be a little bit of a shocker that it's gonna be tough to see happen. Maybe Dre Greenlaw at this point. I think, again, with the way that the 49ers have their linebacking, I guess, lineage, right? Bowman, Willis, those guys, stuck around for as long as they did. Bowman unfortunately left, didn't retire a 49er. Patrick Willis did. Could be absolutely Dre Greenlaw and Fred Warner. Those would be the guys besides Nick Bosa. I think Nick Bosa is the easy answer. George Kittle clearly has a shot, but, do the 49ers do some mental gymnastics or, just gymnastics with the salary cap and unfortunately have to make a tough decision when it comes down to it? It would be really hard to see George Kittle in another uniform, though.
He seems like somebody that's just he's a 49er. And
yeah,
we saw Patrick Willis. He played a shorter career, but was dominant the entire time. Retired as a 49er. I wish Navarro Bowman would have did the same thing, but Bowman switched over to the Raiders. Then after that, it kind of went downhill. We have one more question here, and this is from Tony. He says, which player are you most interested in seeing play in the preseason? I'll start off answering this. For me, it's got to be Ricky Pearsall, probably like your first round pick and your second round pick with Green as well. Just what they look like and what their role is. Like right now, I kind of have an idea of what I think Ricky Pearsall's role is supposed to be, but when you see them extend Juwan Jennings the way they did, and have him kind of under control for the next couple of years, is he still kind of your de facto third wide receiver on the field? He's blocking, or do you figure out a way to where if it's a passing situation, you get Pearsall on the field? Like I want to see what is Ricky Pearsall's role in this offense. So that's a big one for me, and I would love to see him play. But do you have any thoughts on who you want to see playing preseason?
Yeah, Dominic Pooney. I really want to see if the 49ers take a little bit of a leap of faith with the offensive line in terms of the way that Spencer Burford started right away. If Pooney can come out here and kick some ass at training camp and then all of a sudden in preseason, it really puts you in a spot where you have to kind of get away from, well, he's not a veteran. Put your best players on the field and what an offensive line upgrade could mean for this team and could mean for how in the tougher situations, it seems like that's when those are the biggest drop-offs is the offensive line, right? Like those are the biggest lapses. I'm interested to see Dominic Pooney. And then one other one for sure, and this is kind of a boring one, but Jair Brown. I want Jair Brown to get an entire time, an entire training camp, everything under his feet, start the season, go into the season as the starter. I really want to see him put a stranglehold on this safety spot. And honestly, him and Hufanga should be the guys, depending on when he's ready. But I want to see Jair Brown, if Hufanga's not there, kind of step up a little bit more and play a little bit more because they are going to need him going forward. And I think that he is a really good player himself.
A lot of interesting storylines there for the San Francisco 49ers as training camp approaches. Are you going to be out here at all for training camp?
Yeah. I'm just I'm going to start a GoFundMe because the tickets are getting a little expensive to get out there. And then now it's $20 for each ticket. But yeah, I'm looking to get it on the
25.
No, it's 20 now. It's 20. Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's for a good cause. It goes to the 49er Foundation, so it's for a good cause. That's the best way you could put it. But it's $20 each day. But am I tripping, or did they knock down the amount of open sessions? Because I remember going to like the last two before and being able to go to at least like 10, 12 sessions. Now it's just 10 open sessions. Everything else is closed off. It feels like it's a little bit tighter now in terms of like what they're showing. Like even in the first week, there's only 2 open practices. So I'm looking to get on the 24th so I can get to the 25th to 26th. And then those 2 days after, Monday's the next open practice. But that schedule does look a little weird where they're kind of cutting down the open practices. It was almost like every practice was open.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. I'm definitely going to make my way out there. So make sure you see us, see Aponte, see myself, see my guy Peacock out there as well. And make sure you guys follow Jason Aponte. You guys can always find him on Twitter at Jason Aponte 2103. You can find me. So there's more questions here. We're going to get to your questions and more on Monday's episode live right here on Locked On 49ers. Let's go.
Subscribe to this video.